This video was made possible by AfriStory Productions.
It was an informal farewell to British rule in Kenya.
Since independence in December 1963, Kenya has had 5 heads of state and 1 failed coup, making it one of the most stable countries on the continent, transitioning peacefully from one president to another. Kenyan presidents exemplify the idea that in politics there are no permanent enemies or friends, but only permanent interests. This video looks at all Kenyan heads of state from 1963 to 2022. Initially, Kenya had no president. The country became independent on the 12th of December 1963. With Queen Elizabeth II as the head of state and Malcolm MacDonald as the Governor General, appointed by the Queen on advice from her Kenyan Prime Minister, who at the time was Jomo Kenyatta. As part of the 1963 Constitution, the Senate and the House of Representatives were constituted into a bicameral parliament. When the Constitution was amended in 1964, the Senate and the House of Representatives were combined into a unicameral National Assembly. Kenya became a republic with the president as the head of state and government. And that's how Jomo Kenyatta became the first president of Kenya.
1 year after becoming independent, Kenya now assumes republican status within the Commonwealth. Jomo Kenyatta arrived at Jamhuri Park, Nairobi, to take the oath as president.
Jomo Kenyatta, a Kikuyu by tribe, was born around 1890. He began his political career in 1925 as a representative of the Kikuyu Central Association, an organization that sought native land reforms and justice using constitutional and non-violent means. In April 1953, he was tried and sentenced to 7 years of forced labor for his participation in the Mau Mau revolt against the British rule in Kenya. Having served 9 years in prison, Kenyatta was released. 2 months later, as president of the Kenya African National Union, he led a delegation to London for the Lancaster House Conference that paved way for Kenya's independence. Upon becoming president, he picked Jaramogi Odinga as his vice president. Then in 1964, he convinced his rivals in the Kenya African Democratic Union to join him, among whom was Daniel Arap Moi, whom he appointed as vice president for the rest of his term after falling out with Odinga. Kenyatta's reign will go down in history as one of the golden eras in Kenya's positive development. He is seen as a leader who united all races and tribes in the fight for Kenya's freedom.
What we have been struggling for is to redeem our country from the yoke of colonialism.
As a Pan-Africanist, he was also instrumental in the founding of the East African Community. Nevertheless, his colleagues severely criticized his high-handedness, abuse of power, a cult of personality, and massive unethical accumulation of wealth. In a land-hungry nation, the president and his family acquired valuable large farms as well as chunks of land. His fourth wife, Mama Ngina Kenyatta, was a subject of controversy, who seized a valuable ruby mine with impunity. She was also deeply involved in a number of other businesses like the export of charcoal to the Middle East that caused massive deforestation in the country. In addition, she was also involved in the ivory trade that wiped out a lot of Kenyan elephants. Kenyatta's legacy was also heavily damaged by the assassination of politicians like Pio Gama Pinto in 1965, Tom Mboya in 1969, and Josiah M. Kariuki in 1975. Towards the end of the 1960s, Kenyatta's health started to deteriorate, suffering a mild stroke in 1968. On the 22nd of August 1978, Jomo Kenyatta died of a heart attack, making him the first Kenyan president to die in office. Following his death, a new president had to be elected within 90 days. Meanwhile, the vice president, Daniel Arap Moi at the time, had to fill the presidential duties until a new leader was elected as per the constitution. However, a faction within the ruling Kenya African National Union Party had long been troubled by the implications of this provision, since it would grant very real powers to Arap Moi, a Kalenjin by tribe, who would threaten their interests. And so, unconstitutional and clandestine attempts were employed to avoid the succession from taking place. At the center of this drama was the Assistant Chief of Police, James Mungai. The plan assumed that Kenyatta would die in Nakuru, where he spent the majority of his time, and that a private army would assassinate leading politicians such as Moi, Kibaki, and Njonjo, among others, when they were summoned to Kenyatta's deathbed. However, Kenyatta died in Nakuru and not Mombasa, making his plan unsuccessful. Immediately, Njonjo and Kibaki moved to install Moi as the interim president, saving the republic, its constitution, and democracy. Later, Moi was nominated as KANU's sole candidate for the presidency, becoming Kenyatta's successor and the second president of Kenya. He was sworn in on the 14th of October 1978.
Daniel Toroitich Arap Moi, naapa kwamba nitakuwa mwaminifu kwa Jamhuri ya Kenya na kuitumikia kwa moyo wangu.
In contrast to Kenyatta's autocratic leadership style, Moi was a darling of the people. During his first months as president, he released 26 political prisoners across the ethnic spectrum, most of whom had been languishing in jails for years. His devotion to local fundraisers, frequent trips to the countryside, free school milk, and an excellent memory kept him popular with many across the country. For his national and regional legitimacy, Moi enlisted the help of the more entrenched Kikuyu community. However, things changed on the 1st of August 1982. On this day, Air Force personnel and university students attempted a coup to remove Moi. The military and the police quickly suppressed the revolt, killing over 100 soldiers and 200 civilians. In the aftermath of the failed coup, 12 people were arrested, tried by the court-martial, hanged, and buried in Kamiti Maximum Security Prison. To date, they are the last people to be executed under the Kenyan law. A further 900 would be jailed. After being charged with treason, former Vice President Oginga Odinga and his son Raila Odinga were also charged with financing the coup and detained at Nyayo torture chambers. Under his rule, Moi embraced, entrenched, and continued the one-party rule and its totalitarian legacy inherited from Kenyatta, dashing any hopes of a democratic rule. Activists and intellectuals deemed subversive were jailed en masse, leading to a massive brain drain in the 80s and 90s. Like his predecessor, he practiced nepotism openly by handing out key posts to his tribesmate, the Kalenjin, and promoting interests at every opportunity, using state power to undermine the patronage networks of the old Kikuyu elite established during Kenyatta's regime. His entire rule was marred with corruption that literally collapsed the Kenyan economy. By the time his 24-year reign came to an end, Kenya's economic growth was at its knees, between negative and 2%. Moi's political career ended when he was barred from running for president in 2002. The idea of amending the constitution to allow Moi to run for a third term was floated by some of his supporters. But instead, he rejected it and chose Uhuru Kenyatta to succeed him as president. Uhuru went head-to-head with Mwai Kibaki and lost by a 2-1 majority. After 24 years in power, the self-proclaimed professor of politics, Moi handed over power peacefully. To this day, this has been his biggest credit. Just like Jomo Kenyatta, by the time he left power, the former herdsman and his family were one of the wealthiest families in Kenya. Records show that the Moi family had accumulated a wealth of at least $3 billion in the 24 years that they led Kenya. Emilio Stanley Mwai Kibaki, a Kikuyu, was one of the founding fathers of Kenya. Between 1978 to 1988, he served as the fourth vice president of Kenya under President Daniel Arap Moi. Kibaki became president after dissatisfaction with some members of the KANU, chief among was Raila Odinga. You see, Raila Odinga had hoped to succeed Moi as KANU's candidate for the presidency in the 2002 elections. Instead, Moi selected Uhuru Kenyatta. In protest, Odinga and other party members formed the Rainbow Alliance to decide the party's presidential candidate through a vote among KANU members. The Rainbow Alliance and Odinga left KANU to form the Liberal Democratic Party after their pleas were ignored by Moi. Soon after, the LDP formed the National Rainbow Coalition in cooperation with several other parties, including the National Alliance of Kenya, with Kibaki as the leader. In the event that Kibaki was elected president, he and Raila Odinga agreed to equally share cabinet positions and power, including appointing Odinga to the new strong prime minister position. On the 21st of November 2005, Kenya held a constitutional referendum to review the amount of power vested in the presidency. It was here that Kibaki backtracked on the promise to Odinga to create a strong prime minister position. When Odinga campaigned successfully against Kibaki's draft constitution, all Raila-allied ministers were dismissed by Kibaki following the defeat on the 23rd of November 2005.
In accordance with the powers conferred upon me, I have directed that the offices of all ministers and all assistant ministers become vacant.
In the upcoming elections, lines had been drawn between the two.
Honorable Mwai Kibaki, 4,584,721. Raila Odinga, 4,352,993. This means Honorable Mwai Kibaki is the winner. The Commission therefore declares Honorable Mwai Kibaki as the President of Kenya.
In the 2007 elections, Kibaki defeated Odinga and his Orange Democratic Party, of which Odinga accused Kibaki of electoral fraud. In a highly contested election where the results were generally disputed, Kibaki had sworn himself in within an hour of being declared winner. The opposition viewed the election result as a plot by Kibaki's Kikuyu tribe, Kenya's largest to retain power. The tribes that lost political power grew upset and anti-Kikuyu sentiment swelled, spawning the 2007-2008 Kenyan crisis. As violence broke out in several parts of the country, starting with Raila's supporters protesting their victory that it had been stolen, this escalated the situation by targeting Kikuyus who in turn retaliated. As the upset spread, there was widespread theft, vandalism, looting, destruction of property, and significant number of atrocities, killings, and sexual violence were reported. The violence continued for more than 2 months as Kibaki ruled with the half cabinet he had appointed, with Odinga and the ODM refusing to recognize him as president. The country was only saved by the mediation of the United Nations Secretary General Kofi Annan, backed by the African Union, the United States, and the United Kingdom. In February 2008, a power-sharing agreement was signed between Raila Odinga and Kibaki, with Kibaki remaining president and Raila Odinga becoming prime minister. On the 17th of April 2008, Raila Odinga was sworn in as the Prime Minister of Kenya, along with a power-sharing cabinet that was carefully balanced ethnically with 42 ministers and 50 assistant ministers. As an economist, Kibaki did much as president to repair the damage done to the country's economy by the Moi years. Kenya was much better managed, with far more competent public sector personnel, and was significantly transformed. The country's economy experienced a major turnaround. GDP growth picked up from a low of 0.6% in 2002 to 7%. Development was resumed in all areas of the country, including the neglected and largely underdeveloped semi-arid north. Many sectors of the economy were recovered from total collapse before 2003. Numerous state corporations that had collapsed during the Moi years were revived and began operating profitably. The telecommunications sector boomed, rebuilding, modernization, and expansion of infrastructure began in earnest. Several ambitious infrastructure and other projects such as the Thika Superhighway, which would have been seen as unattainable during the Moi years, were completed. However, Kibaki was accused of ruling with a small group of his elderly peers, mainly from the educated side of the Kikuyu elite that emerged in the Jomo Kenyatta era, usually referred to as the Kitchen Cabinet or the Mount Kenya Mafia. Though Kibaki was never personally accused of corruption and managed to virtually end the grabbing of public land rampant in the Moi and Kenyatta eras, he was unable to adequately contain Kenya's widely entrenched culture of endemic corruption. Kibaki handed over the Kenyan presidency to his successor Uhuru Kenyatta, son of Jomo Kenyatta, on the 9th of April 2013. He said, "I am happy to pass the torch of leadership to the new generation of leaders." The handover marked the end of his presidency and of his 50 years of public service. Uhuru Kenyatta was raised in a wealthy and politically powerful Kikuyu family. Well, this is because his dad was the first president of Kenya. He became politically active in the 90s, and in 1997 he was the chairman of the local branch of the Kenya African Union, and later that year ran unsuccessfully for a parliamentary seat. President Moi appointed him to several ministerial posts. Kenyatta's profile rose considerably when he was chosen as the KANU candidate for the presidency, an event ignited by Moi, who was ineligible to stand for another term. In light of this move, many feared that Moi might continue to rule through Kenyatta after retirement, which would make him immune from numerous allegations of abuse of office. Uhuru lost the election with 31% of the vote, conceded defeat, and took up an active leadership role as the leader of opposition.
The choice of the people, and in particular, now concede that Mr. Mwai Kibaki will be the third president of the Republic
of Kenya. In 2005, Uhuru led the campaign for a referendum against the draft constitution in partnership with Liberal Democratic Party, a rebel faction in the Kibaki government, and Raila Odinga. In the run-up to 2007 election, Kenyatta again entered the race, but withdrew a few months before the election, supporting Kibaki, who was running for a second term against Raila Odinga. In the aftermath of the election, Kenya dived into the 2007-2008 Kenyan crisis along ethnic lines, mainly targeting Kikuyus. Under an agreement that ended the chaos, power was to be shared with Raila as Prime Minister and Uhuru Kenyatta as Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. In late 2010, ICC named Kenyatta among the 6 suspects thought to be responsible for the post-election violence. In January 2012, the ICC announced that it would prosecute 4 of the 6 suspects, including Kenyatta. Among the accusations were that Kenyatta funded the Mungiki, a Kikuyu criminal gang that attacked Odinga's supporters after the disputed elections. In the wake of the charges, Kenyatta resigned as Minister of Finance but remained as Deputy Prime Minister. Kenyatta and KANU split in April 2012, forming the National Alliance. Later that year, he and the TNA became part of a multi-party alliance known as the Jubilee Coalition. The alliance also included William Ruto, who was the other ICC suspect. Both campaigned together for president and vice president. In 2013, Uhuru Kenyatta was elected as the 4th president of Kenya under the National Alliance. Kenyatta continued to face charges in court with his trial repeatedly delayed. The prosecution complained of lack of cooperation from Kenyan officials in gathering evidence. In December 2014, the International Criminal Court dropped all charges against Kenyatta, with prosecution claiming that the Kenyan government had obstructed the ICC in gathering critical evidence. In addition, they also cited widespread intimidation of witnesses, both which had hampered the prosecution's case. The Jubilee Coalition was dissolved in September 2016 and reorganized into one political organization known as the Jubilee Party, in preparation for the 2017 elections with Kenyatta as the flag bearer. On the 8th of August 2017, Kenyatta was re-elected with more than 54% of the vote, beating Raila Odinga and a coalition of opposition parties called the National Super Alliance, who trailed with 45% of the vote. In a staggering turn of events, Kenyatta's re-election was nullified by the Supreme Court on the 1st of September. The Supreme Court ordered a new election, which was to be held within 60 days. The ruling was in response to a petition that Odinga and NASA had filed in the court. The petition alleged that the results of the presidential election had been manipulated and were therefore compromised and should be nullified. On the 10th of October, Odinga withdrew from the election. On the 26th of October, the election went ahead as planned, with Kenyatta winning handily with 98% of the vote. On the 9th of March 2018, Uhuru Kenyatta agreed to a truce with the opposition leader, Raila Odinga. This marks the country's watershed moment that reshaped the country's political architecture. He was sworn in on the 28th of November 2017 for his second term as president.
I, Uhuru Kenyatta, in full realization of the high calling I assume as President of the Republic of Kenya, do swear that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to the Republic of Kenya, that I will obey, preserve, protect and defend this Constitution of Kenya as by law established. So help me God.
By 2013, Kenyatta had an estimated worth of $500 million US dollars, making him one of Kenya's richest men. He has considerable business holdings in ventures like media, banking, tourism, insurance, and dairy. The Kenyatta family also owns more than 500,000 acres of land in Kenya, much of which had been acquired by his father during a post-colonial land transfer program. Their real estate holdings made the family one of the largest landowners in the country, where land ownership disputes were a long-standing source of resentment among people whose families had been displaced during the colonial era. In the 2022 election, Uhuru backed his longtime arch-rival Raila Odinga to succeed him after he left power against his deputy president, William Ruto, who thought that he would receive his blessing, well, given that he was twice his vice president, leading to an epic showdown. At the time of this recording, Uhuru was packing his belongings and evacuating the State House in Nairobi, something that we don't see often on the continent.